What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to discover his host has a hidden agenda? In just 27 seconds, a single comment would expose the true character of a talk show host and trigger an explosive confrontation that nobody saw coming. Michael Douglas settled into the plush red chair, adjusting his jacket as the studio lights warmed his face. The audience buzzed with excitement, phones already recording what they hoped would be memorable moments to share later. Graham Norton flashed his trademark grin, but something felt different tonight. There was an edge in his eyes, a sharpness that experienced performers recognize immediately. "Michael, welcome back to the show," Graham began, his voice carrying that familiar lilt that millions of viewers had grown to love. "Always a pleasure to have you here." "Thanks for having me, Graham. Great to be back." The opening pleasantries flowed smoothly enough. Michael discussed his latest project, shared a funny story about working with his co-stars, and the audience laughed in all the right places. But Graham kept steering the conversation toward more personal territory, probing in ways that made Michael shift slightly in his seat. "Now, Michael, I have to ask about your personal life," Graham said, leaning forward with that conspiratorial tone he used when he thought he was being clever. "Your marriage to Catherine has been in the spotlight quite a bit lately." Michael's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're very happy, Graham. Catherine's doing wonderfully, and we're both focused on our family." "Yes, but there have been rumors, haven't there? About difficulties? About challenges in your relationship?" Graham pressed, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of drama. The audience grew quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Michael straightened in his chair, his decades of experience in front of cameras telling him exactly where this was headed. "Graham, I think we should focus on the film. That's why I'm here tonight." But Graham wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed energized by Michael's discomfort, like a predator catching the scent of wounded prey. "Come now, Michael. The public is curious about these things. They see the headlines. They wonder what's really going on behind closed doors. Surely you can give us something more than the standard 'we're very happy' line?" Michael's jaw tensed. "My family isn't entertainment, Graham. Catherine and I don't owe the public details about our private life." "But that's where you're wrong, isn't it?" Graham shot back, his tone becoming sharper. "When you're a public figure, when you take their money at the box office, don't you think people deserve to know who you really are, not this polished version you present?" The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of cameras capturing every moment. Michael's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening slightly. Years of media training had taught him to stay calm, to deflect, to redirect. But Graham wasn't playing by the usual rules. "I've always been honest with my fans," Michael said carefully. "But honesty doesn't mean I have to expose every private moment of my life for public consumption." Graham laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Honest? Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're hiding quite a bit. The rehab stint that nobody was supposed to know about, the marriage counseling, the fights that the neighbors can hear through the walls." Michael's face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Graham leaned back, clearly enjoying himself now. "I do my research, Michael. I know about the drinking, the late nights, the arguments that sent Catherine to her mother's house, not once, but 3 separate times last year. That's enough." Michael's voice was low and dangerous, but Graham was on a roll now, drunk on his own perceived power. "And what about the real reason Catherine married you? Was it love? Or was it the lifestyle, the houses, the cars, the status that comes with being Mrs. Michael Douglas?" The audience gasped audibly. Even the camera operators seemed shocked by the brazen cruelty of the question. Michael sat perfectly still for a moment, processing what had just been said about the woman he loved. "You want to know the truth, Graham?" Michael's voice was controlled but seething with anger. "The truth is that Catherine married me because she saw something in me that apparently you're incapable of recognizing. She saw decency. She saw a man who treats people with respect, who doesn't humiliate guests on national television for cheap laughs." Graham's smile faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "Oh please, spare me the noble husband routine. We all know Hollywood marriages are business arrangements. Your first marriage certainly was." That was the line too far. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. The sudden movement caused a stir in the studio, with producers stepping forward from the shadows. "You have no right to talk about my family," Michael said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. "No right at all." Graham looked up at Michael with a mixture of surprise and amusement, as if he couldn't quite believe someone had actually challenged him on his own show. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bid or if they were witnessing a genuine meltdown. "Michael, please sit down," Graham said with mock concern, his voice dripping with condescension. You're making our audience uncomfortable. I'm making them uncomfortable? Michael's voice rose slightly, his Hollywood composure finally cracking. You just insulted my wife on national television, and you think I'm the problem here? Graham gestured dismissively with his hand. I asked legitimate questions that any journalist would ask. If you can't handle a little scrutiny, perhaps you shouldn't be in this business. The arrogance in Graham's tone was breathtaking. Michael could see the production crew exchanging worried glances, but their host seemed oblivious to the damage he was causing. A little scrutiny? Michael repeated incredulously. You called my marriage a business arrangement. You made up stories about fights and rehab that never happened. That's not journalism, Graham. That's tabloid garbage. Graham shrugged, that infuriating smile never leaving his face. If the shoe fits, Michael. Look, everyone knows celebrities put on acts for the public. I'm just trying to show our viewers the real person behind the facade. The real person? Michael's hands trembled slightly with rage. You want to see the real person? The real person is someone who's been married to the same woman for over 20 years. Someone who's raised children and grandchildren, someone who's worked hard to build a career based on respect and professionalism. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Oh, here we go, Graham said with theatrical eye rolling. The lecture about respect and professionalism from someone who's had how many public scandals? Michael stepped closer to Graham's desk, his presence commanding the entire studio's attention. What scandals? Name one scandal that wasn't manufactured by people like you, desperate for content to fill your shows. Graham's confidence wavered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. Well, there was the incident with the paparazzi outside the restaurant, the argument with that director on set, the rumors about your behavior at award shows. Rumors? Michael emphasized the word. Stories made up by people who weren't there, blown out of proportion by hosts who care more about ratings than truth. You just proved my point perfectly. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Some were filming with their phones, others just stared in shock at the unfolding drama. Graham seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation, and his response was to double down on his attacks. Let's talk about your son then, Graham said, his tone becoming even more vicious. Cameron's troubles with drugs, with the law. What kind of father raises a son who ends up in federal prison? Michael's face went white. The mention of his son's struggles hit like a physical blow. And for a moment, he couldn't speak. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. How dare you? Michael whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with such pain and fury that it carried to every corner of the room. How dare you use my son's illness as entertainment? Graham sensed he had found Michael's weakness and pressed his advantage with the cruelty of a schoolyard bully. Illness? Is that what we're calling criminal behavior now? Maybe if you'd spent less time making movies and more time being a father, things would have turned out differently. That was it. Michael's hand slammed down on Graham's desk with a sound that made everyone in the studio jump. Coffee cups rattled, papers scattered, and Graham actually flinched backward in his chair. You know nothing about my family, Michael said, his voice now deadly calm, in a way that was somehow more frightening than his anger. Nothing about the years we spent trying to help Cameron, the sleepless nights, the interventions, the love and support we gave him through every step of his recovery. You sit here in your comfortable chair, making jokes about other people's pain, and you think that makes you clever. Graham tried to regain his composure, but his voice shook slightly. Michael, I think you need to calm down. This is still my show. Your show? Michael laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. This isn't a show, Graham. This is a circus, and you're the clown. The only difference is that clowns are supposed to make people happy, not destroy them for sport. The production assistants were now clearly visible at the edges of the set, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Graham looked around nervously, perhaps finally realizing that he had pushed too far. I'm just doing my job, Graham said weakly. No, Michael replied firmly. Your job is to entertain people, to make them feel good, to give them a break from their problems. Your job is not to ambush guests with personal attacks and then act surprised when they defend themselves. Graham's mask was slipping now. His trademark charm was nowhere to be found, replaced by something petty and mean. Well, if you can't handle the heat, maybe you should stay out of the kitchen. Michael stared at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. The heat? You think this is heat? This is just cruelty disguised as entertainment. And the saddest part is that you actually think you're being clever. Graham's face twisted into an ugly sneer, all pretense of charm completely abandoned now. You know what your problem is, Michael? You think you're better than everyone else. You think your Hollywood royalty status makes you untouchable. Michael shook his head slowly, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his eyes. No, Graham, I think I'm a human being who deserves basic respect. Something you clearly don't understand. Respect? Graham stood up now, matching Michael's posture but lacking any of his dignity. You want respect? You've been coasting on your father's name for decades. Without Kirk Douglas, you'd be nobody. Just another failed actor waiting tables in Los Angeles. The audience gasped again. Several people could be heard whispering in shock at the sheer viciousness of the attack. Michael's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice remained controlled. My father taught me something you obviously never learned, Michael said quietly. He taught me that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. He taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats people when he has power over them. Graham laughed mockingly. Oh, spare me the life lessons from Hollywood royalty. You think you can come on my show and lecture me about character? You're just angry because someone finally called you out on your perfect little facade. Called me out on what exactly? Michael challenged. On loving my wife? On supporting my son through his darkest moments? On trying to be a decent human being? If those are crimes, then I'm guilty as charged. Graham's producer appeared at the edge of the set, making frantic hand gestures to try to get his attention. But Graham was too far gone now, too committed to his destructive path to notice or care. Decent human being? Graham's voice rose to an almost hysterical pitch. You live in a mansion while people sleep on the streets. You make millions for pretending to be other people while teachers and nurses struggle to pay their bills. Don't talk to me about decency. Michael's expression shifted from anger to something approaching pity. You're right about one thing, Graham. I've been incredibly fortunate in my life, and that's exactly why I try to use that fortune responsibly. I support charities. I mentor young actors. I try to give back to the community that's given me so much. What do you do with your platform besides tear people down? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Graham's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed genuinely speechless. Michael pressed his advantage, his voice gaining strength. You have a show that millions of people watch. You have the power to make them laugh, to make them think, to brighten their day. Instead, you choose to use that power to humiliate and hurt people. Why? Does it make you feel important? Does it fill some empty space inside you? I don't have to listen to this, Graham muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you don't, Michael agreed. You could have chosen not to listen to your research team when they dug up rumors about my family. You could have chosen not to repeat gossip and lies on national television. You could have chosen to be better than this, but you didn't. Graham's face was flush red now. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was impossible to tell. This is my show, he repeated weakly, as if saying it would somehow restore his authority. Then act like it, Michael shot back. Act like someone who deserves to have a show. Act like someone who respects their guests and their audience. Act like someone who understands the responsibility that comes with having a platform. The studio was absolutely silent, except for the quiet sounds of cameras still rolling. Every person in the room seemed to understand they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. Michael straightened his jacket and looked directly into the nearest camera. To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that you deserve better than this. You deserve entertainment that doesn't come at the expense of other people's dignity. You deserve hosts who lift you up instead of dragging everyone else down to their level. He turned back to Graham, who was still standing behind his desk, looking stunned and defeated. And Graham, I genuinely hope you take some time to think about the kind of person you want to be. Because right now, you're showing the world the very worst of what happens when someone gets a little power and forgets what it means to be human. Michael began walking toward the studio exit, his steps echoing in the silent space. Graham finally found his voice, calling out desperately behind him. You can't just leave. We're in the middle of a show. Michael paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. No, Graham. You ended this show the moment you decided to attack my family. What we just witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was a man revealing who he really is when he thinks nobody will hold him accountable. He looked once more at the stunned audience. Thank you all for your time tonight. I'm sorry you had to see this, but I hope it reminds you that everyone, no matter how famous or successful, is still a human being who deserves to be treated with basic dignity. With that, Michael Douglas walked off the set, leaving behind a host who had been completely exposed, an audience in shock, and a moment that would be replayed and discussed for years to come. Graham stood alone behind his desk, the silence stretching endlessly as he realized the magnitude of what he had just done to his own reputation and career.